my memories of recording 10538 Overture are pretty vivid still, because it was quite an unusual session. This was in Philip's studio in Marble Arch, which was a nice place. And I got this big fat guitar riff and I laid that down. And then Roy started overdubbing cellos. It was the same cello, it was just one cello that he just got, a Chinese one. It cost 30 quid, I think. It was very posh for its day. And, not really. So anyway, we just kept adding these cellos to this big guitar riff, and it gradually started turning into something which sounded just like the Electric Light Orchestra. And that was the first song and first recording that we made as the EMI.
10538 Overture was the debut hit for the Electric Light Orchestra in the summer of 1972, although the song first saw the light of day nearly 2 years earlier, while Roy and Jeff were still recording as The Move. Technology had progressed considerably towards the end of the 60s, but tracks were still limited at the start of the new decade, with 8 being the maximum available to most artists. So it was always a case of having both a clear idea of what you wanted to achieve and a methodical approach to recording in order to make the most of your multitrack. Nigel Reeve from EMI Records.
More often than not, when you look at other people's multitracks, everything's set out quite methodically. You spread the drums over a certain amount of tracks. Roy, in the way he recorded, would have multi-instruments spread all over the multitracks, and we've done some rough mixes of some of these tracks in the past, and it takes a little bit of while to get your head around quite where it's at and what Roy was trying to get. But he knew in his own head. You can look at the multi-tracks, you look at them and go, wow, this is all over the place. But Roy knew exactly what he was doing and how he was doing it. And when you come to kind of go back over those multis and try and build again what he originally created, it takes a bit of time to get your head around it.
Okay, so we're now in Steve Levine's studio, and we have the 8-track multi-track of 10538 Overture. 8-track, that sounds a little bit old and archaic, doesn't it, 8?
Well, when you look at the date of when this track was recorded, which was the summer of 1970, 8-track was already old technology. Many studios had already started moving towards 16 tracks, so it's unusual in that way.
So is this the state of the 8-track art in 1970 then?
Well, this would have been towards the end of the life of 8-track, and so it would have been the best that 8-track actually got. So in terms of quality, it's actually quite good quality. So if we start by playing the multi-track...
Take one.
And we'll let it start up, you'll hear the count in. I'm going to start by soloing just the drum track. And if you listen carefully, you'll notice that the electric guitar that plays the riff is actually bleeding across the snare microphones. In fact, it's making the snare rattle. So that would indicate that the backing track was cut with the guitar as part of that. And in fact, why don't I now solo that electric guitar?
Don't they put the amplifiers, the guitar amps, in a different room these days?
Well, these days they do. We try and isolate everything as much as possible, but they have recorded the guitar on a separate track, so there is some control. The other thing that is very significant in the way that this riff comes across is that it's not only just electric guitar, but it's also this beautiful acoustic guitar. So I'll solo just the acoustic guitar so you can hear that. Now I'm going to pan them extreme left and right so that you can hear clearly the electric on one side and the acoustic on the other. And if we add into the bass, you've now got a traditional rock backing track, drums, bass and guitar. Now, the thing that made it ELO were the cellos, so why don't we solo the cellos? Now, although the cellos take up 2 tracks of the multi-track, they are actually a result of multiple track performances. So Roy recorded as many as 15 actual cello overdubs to create this sound. And this is very complicated to do on 8-track. So in order to get this multiple overdubbing sound, he would record his initial cello, add a second cello and record that to a new track. So that's now 2 on 1 track, and keep this process going and going and going.
That's called bouncing down.
Bouncing down and multi-tracking simultaneously. There's no going back. Once he's made the second or third overdub, they would have had to have wiped the original track. So it just builds this enormous sound.
Is that why ELO record sound is so big and fat? Because he always played over himself rather than recording 15 cellists at one time?
Well, the sound of rock and roll cellos are very, very different to the sound of cellos recorded with an orchestra. Traditionally, if one was recording an orchestra, you'd have multiple mics, but because of the sheer number of players, you can't get the microphones that close. When you have an individual cello player, or say a quartet, you can get the microphones physically much closer. And because of the way that they would have recorded this, using compression and EQ to create that very biting sound, it becomes a sound of its own. And in fact, when you compare the sound of Roy's cellos to that of a real orchestra, they are significantly different. But you need that to fight against the sound of drums and bass of a rock record, because again, if you listen to a classical record, they don't have this huge, great big drum sound on them.
So he invented rock cello, did he?
I think he did. I think he did. The other part of the orchestra that Roy has added is French horn. Now, because tracks were very tight, the French horn, which is actually double-tracked, one part of it is on the tambourine track and the other part is on the vocal track. So let me just solo the 2 French horns. So here's the first track of French horn. And now the second one.
So this is once again Roy playing his French horn twice.
Correct.
Over himself.
And that creates this slightly choral sound. If you think back again to an orchestra, a French horn section may be 4, possibly 6, and sometimes even 8, but it's normally a large section. And very often French horns play in unison, and by a single player playing the part twice, you create somewhat of an orchestral sound.
And this whole process must have taken ages.
It would have taken longer then because of the fact they had such limited tracks, and the bouncing process would have had to have taken place after every significant overdub. On the subject of bouncing, let's now listen to the vocals.
Did you see a friend crying from his eyes today?
Now the vocals take up only 1 track, but as you can clearly hear, they're a multi-vocal sound.
Through the streets and far away.
Now I can't separate them because they are only on 1 track, but I want to draw your attention to this very interesting part of the backing vocals. Let me just play you this.
What's he done to the voices there?
Well, it sounds like the vocals have then been placed through the Leslie cabinet of an organ. Normally a Leslie cabinet would be used with a Hammond organ, and it's a very well-known sound. You can slow and speed up the sound of the horn, which creates this Doppler effect. Now, putting the vocals through it was quite a production trick. So what they did was they would have recorded the vocals first, fed them out into the studio through the speaker cabinet of the Leslie, and then sped the Leslie cabinet up to create that whoa sound.
Wobbly sound.
And then re-recorded it back onto the tape. The Beatles had used this effect on some of their songs, but it's actually a difficult process. But I think you'll agree, quite a brilliant sound in the track, and it's certainly a signature sound on this record.
Electric Light Orchestra's 10538 Overture. And before we leave the track, a final word from Roy on how Jeff Lynne's song got its title.
He said, I'd like the song to be about somebody with a number and not a name, a bit like the Prisoner TV series. And we were thinking about it, we were going through, and he was singing bits and pieces in the control room. And then we noticed there was a number on the mixing desk, and it was 1053, was the actual serial number of the mixer, the mixing desk. And we looked at it, we pointed at each other, and that was it. And he just added the number 8 on the end, 10538, and it just worked a treat. And we were smiling all day after that. It was brilliant.